The Lockheed P-38 Lightning, an aircraft heralded by a formidable reputation, made its debut in European skies late in 1942. Its distinctive twin-engine, twin-boom configuration and impressive capability of reaching 400 meters in level flight set it apart from all other aerial combatants. American military leaders held high expectations, anticipating that the Lightning would assert air superiority over the Luftwaffe, with the same decisive effectiveness it had demonstrated in the Pacific theater. However, within a mere few months, the P-38 squadrons stationed in England began submitting after-action reports that painted a starkly different and deeply troubling picture. These accounts were rife with expressions of profound frustration, chronic mechanical malfunctions, and a distressing frequency of empty seats at the mission debriefing tables, underscoring a grim reality. The gravest manifestation of this unforeseen predicament emerged with chilling regularity during high-altitude interception missions, when P-38 pilots would visually acquire German fighter aircraft beneath them and initiate a high-speed dive to engage. They confidently relied on their inherent speed advantage to press the attack. Yet instead of achieving the anticipated tactical edge, a truly terrifying phenomenon would occur as their aircraft approached speeds of approximately 500 mph. The control yoke, the very instrument of their command, would become rigidly unresponsive in their grip. Concurrently, the aircraft's nose would inexplicably pitch downward of its own accord, intensifying the dive beyond the pilot's capacity to counteract it. Airspeed gauges would then relentlessly climb past 550 mph, then exceed 600 mph, as the entire airframe vibrated violently, seemingly on the verge of disintegration. While some exceptionally fortunate and resolute pilots managed to wrestle their way out of these perilous dives through sheer physical exertion and serendipity, a significant number were tragically unable to do so, perishing in the uncontrolled descent. Between the months of October 1943 and January 1944, the 55th Fighter Group alone recorded the loss of 11 P-38s, to what official reports dispassionately labeled as compressibility accidents. These incidents involved aircraft plunging into the cold waters of the English Channel or impacting the French countryside, despite having perfectly functional engines and suffering no damage from enemy fire. The term compressibility itself was scarcely present in aviation lexicon prior to the outbreak of the war. Lockheed's engineers possessed a theoretical understanding of this phenomenon, but such theories were confined to the controlled environments of wind tunnels and academic papers, far removed from the brutal realities of combat at 25,000 feet over occupied France. What the P-38 pilots were experiencing was their aircraft nearing the speed of sound, specifically around Mach 0.68 during a dive, at which point the airflow over the upper surface of the wing began to generate powerful shock waves. These shock waves fundamentally altered the aircraft's aerodynamic characteristics. Crucially, the horizontal stabilizer, strategically positioned between the twin-tail booms, entered this zone of disturbed air, trailing the shock waves, resulting in a near-total loss of its control authority. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. In practical terms, this meant the elevator, a critical control surface, ceased to function effectively. The aircraft was transformed into a 16,000-pound glider, inexorably locked into a terminal dive, with the pilot rendered powerless, able only to observe the altimeter spinning wildly and offer desperate prayers. The Luftwaffe, ever vigilant, quickly took notice of this critical vulnerability. German fighter pilots had meticulously refined their combat tactics throughout 1940 and 1941 against the slower Hurricane and Spitfire aircraft, mastering every maneuver, the evasive split S, the aggressive high-side diving pass, and the expedient chandelle climb to disengage from danger. When the P-38's initially arrived, experienced German pilots approached them with a degree of caution. However, by mid-1943, after observing numerous engagements, Luftwaffe tactical bulletins began to highlight a specific weakness. These advisories noted that if a Lightning could be enticed into a dive chase, particularly from altitudes exceeding 20,000 feet, there was a significant probability that the American pilot would lose control around 18,000 feet. Consequently, German pilots began deliberately executing shallow dives when pursued by P-38's, fully aware that the Americans would follow and understanding the disastrous consequences that would likely ensue. This was not merely a tactical advantage, it was a potent form of psychological warfare. P-38 pilots subsequently started to exhibit hesitation at the most critical juncture, that fleeting moment in air combat where aggressive action is paramount. By the spring of 1943, the cohesion and morale within P-38 units were visibly deteriorating. These pilots were far from cowardly. They were courageous volunteers who had traversed an ocean to engage in battle. However, they found themselves flying an aircraft that seemingly punished their aggression, an aircraft that turned the very instincts essential for an effective fighter pilot into a deadly liability. A fundamental change was urgently required, and it needed to happen swiftly, as the air war over Europe was escalating relentlessly, and the 8th Air Force desperately needed every possible advantage it could muster. The Luftwaffe's tactical adaptation to the P-38's Achilles heel was not a mere stroke of opportunistic luck. It was a meticulously developed and systematic response. By June 1943, German fighter units tasked with defending the Reich had formalized specific engagement protocols for confronting the Lightning, disseminating these through official training documentation. Jagdgeschwader 26, one of the most seasoned fighter wings operating from its bases in northern France, had meticulously compiled detailed observations on the characteristics of American fighter aircraft. Their assessment of the P-38 was brutally precise, formidable in level flight and during climbing turns, yet dangerously vulnerable in sustained dives exceeding 450 meters, and predictably hesitant when forced to choose between aggressive engagement and personal safety. Oberleutnant Adolf Galland, who had by this time ascended to the prestigious position of General der Jagdflieger, reportedly reviewed combat film footage captured by gun cameras, which vividly depicted P-38's abruptly disengaging from attacks at crucial moments. In several documented instances, Lightnings had initiated attacks on German formations from a position of altitude advantage, commencing dives, only to suddenly pull up and away just as they approached optimal firing range. Initially, German pilots interpreted this behavior as either excessive caution or a lack of adequate training. However, after thoroughly debriefing multiple encounters and meticulously examining captured or shot down American aircraft, Luftwaffe intelligence officers painstakingly pieced together the puzzle of the compressibility problem. While they did not fully grasp the intricate aerodynamic science behind it, German fighters also contended with their own high-speed handling challenges. they definitively understood its existence and, critically, how to exploit it to their advantage. The standard German defensive tactic evolved into what their pilots colloquially termed the diving spiral. When ambushed by P-38's from a superior altitude, a pilot flying a Bf-109 or FW-190 would immediately initiate a moderate dive, typically angled between 30 and 40 degrees, while simultaneously entering a gentle spiral. This maneuver was not an urgent, full-throttle emergency escape. Rather, it was a carefully calculated tactical move. Careen me. The dive angle was sufficiently steep to rapidly build airspeed and compel the pursuing P-38 to follow in an even steeper dive to close the distance. Yet it was shallow enough to ensure the German fighter remained comfortably below the critical compressibility range. For example, the Messerschmitt Bf-109G could maintain relatively stable controls in dives reaching up to 470 mph. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 was even more robust, remaining controllable past 500 mph under certain conditions. The truly devastating aspect of this tactic lay in its profound psychological impact. A P-38 pilot observing a German fighter diving away was confronted with an agonizing dilemma. If he aggressively pursued to achieve gun range, he faced the very real peril of entering compressibility. Lockup, somewhere between 18,000 and 15,000 feet. Conversely, if he chose to pull up prematurely to mitigate that risk, he allowed the enemy to escape and appeared ineffective to his squadron mates. Both choices gnawed relentlessly at the pilots. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Jenkins of the 55th Fighter Group articulated this predicament in a classified report dated August 15, 1943, stating, "Our pilots know the aircraft's limitation. The Germans know it too. They're using our own airplane against us." Real combat encounters during that summer starkly illuminated the problem with brutal clarity. On July 28, 1943, during a bomber escort mission to Kassel, P-38's from the 20th Fighter Group engaged Bf-109's from Jagdgeschwader 3. The American pilots held a significant advantage in both altitude and position nearly 5,000 feet above the German fighters. When the P-38's initiated their dives to attack, the Messerschmitts immediately split apart and dove in different directions. 3 Lightning pilots tenaciously pursued their targets through 22,000 feet, then through 20,000 feet. At approximately 18,500 feet, 2 of the P-38's catastrophically entered compressibility lockup. One pilot miraculously managed to regain control at 8,000 feet after an uncontrolled descent of 10,000 feet. The other pilot, however, was not so fortunate. His aircraft tragically impacted a forest south of Kassel. The Bf-109's subsequently climbed back to altitude and rejoined their formation. The outcome: no German losses, 1 American pilot dead, and 1 aircraft destroyed. Such mathematics were unequivocally unsustainable. By September 1943, some P-38 squadrons were being discreetly retasked to ground attack roles or redeployed to the Mediterranean theater, where aerial combat typically occurred at lower altitudes, mitigating the compressibility issue. The aircraft that was originally envisioned to command the European skies was, instead, proving to be a significant liability, a fact acknowledged by everyone from squadron commanders to the highest echelons of the 8th Air Force headquarters. The ultimate solution emerged not from the sophisticated engineering departments at Lockheed, nor from the tactical analysts at 8th Air Force headquarters, but from a moment of sheer desperation experienced at 22,000 feet, somewhere over Belgium. The precise name of the pilot responsible for this breakthrough remains a point of contention in historical records. Some accounts attribute the discovery to Captain Robin Olds of the 479th Fighter Group. Others suggest an unnamed pilot from the 55th. What is undeniably significant, however, is that someone, pushed beyond the limits of frustration and willing to attempt anything, executed an action that defied every ingrained instinct of a twin-engine pilot. During a dive pursuit of German fighters in late October 1943, as his aircraft began that sickening shudder that heralded the onset of compressibility, he instinctively reached down and deliberately shut off his right engine. The immediate consequence of this action was so profound that he initially believed something else had catastrophically failed. The violent buffeting instantly smoothed out. The aircraft's nose, which had been stubbornly tucking downward despite his full backward pressure on the yoke, suddenly became responsive to control inputs. Once more, the aircraft continued its dive, still accelerating, but it was now controllable. He was able to pull out of the dive. More importantly, he could sustain the dive for a longer duration, press the attack more closely, and then recover with ample altitude remaining. When he landed and recounted his extraordinary experience, the other pilots in his squadron were convinced he had lost his mind. You don't shut down an engine in combat. You don't deliberately make your aircraft asymmetric while diving at 500 pm toward the ground with German fighters nearby, they argued. It directly contradicted every principle they had been taught regarding engine-out emergencies and the inherent dangers of asymmetric thrust. Yet profound desperation often compels individuals to test even the most unconventional and seemingly irrational ideas. I am from your country region, and I find this video topic absolutely fascinating. The way pilots had to contend with such complex aerodynamic challenges, especially when their lives depended on it, is truly remarkable. It highlights the incredible ingenuity and bravery required in early jet-age combat, and how solutions often came from the most unexpected places. The audacious willingness to experiment with unconventional tactics marked a turning point for P-38 pilots grappling with the perilous effects of compressibility. Within a mere 7 days, 3 additional aviators from the same squadron courageously replicated this daring maneuver during actual combat sorties. Their subsequent reports unanimously corroborated the initial findings, a profound enhancement in control authority during high-velocity descents, affording them the crucial ability to maintain pursuit of German adversaries down to 15,000 feet. A significant improvement from the customary loss of control around 18,000 feet. The dreaded nose-tucking tendency, which rendered compressibility so lethal, was markedly diminished. First Lieutenant James Morris, a pilot among these pioneers, meticulously chronicled his encounter in a mission report dated November 3, 1943, stating, "Shutdown right engine had indicated 480 mph in dive. Aircraft remained controllable through 520 mph, closed to firing range on FW-190 and fired 3-second burst. Observed strikes on enemy aircraft fuselage. Enemy aircraft trailing smoke entered clouds, unable to confirm destruction. Restarted right engine at 12,000 FT without difficulty." This testament underscored the technique's tangible benefits in the crucible of aerial combat. The revelation of this life-saving technique propagated through the P-38 operational community with astonishing speed, albeit through unofficial channels. Squadron pilots exchanged vital intelligence in the relaxed atmosphere of the officers' club, during interludes between arduous missions, and within the confidential confines of their briefing rooms. They meticulously shared intricate details: which engine to power down, the optimal altitude for this critical action, the precise method for restarting, and the telltale signs to monitor. While some aviators discovered that disengaging the left engine yielded equally favorable outcomes, others identified subtle variations in the execution of the technique. The underlying scientific rationale, however, remained an enigma to these combat-hardened individuals. Their immediate imperative was survival and mission accomplishment, not a profound understanding of aerodynamic physics. Paradoxically, the most significant opposition to this innovative method emerged from an unexpected quarter: the maintenance crews. These highly skilled technicians were appalled, recognizing the Allison V-1710 engines, the very heart of the P-38, as complex and notoriously temperamental machines, particularly when subjected to the frigid temperatures prevalent during high-altitude operations over Europe. The deliberate act of shutting down and then attempting to restart such an engine under intense combat conditions seemed to them an open invitation to catastrophic failure, raising legitimate specters of engine fires, mechanical seizures, and unsuccessful restarts. Squadron commanders found themselves confronting a profound ethical and operational quandary. They observed their pilots employing an unauthorized procedure that demonstrably enhanced their combat effectiveness and survival rates, yet simultaneously presented undeniable risks. Crucially, no official testing had been conducted, nor had any technical directive from Lockheed or the Army Air Forces sanctioned its use. Despite these glaring procedural deficiencies, the technique was undeniably working. Pilots who embraced it were navigating and surviving dives that had previously proven fatal, and they were successfully engaging German fighters who had believed themselves to be beyond reach. By the close of November 1943, this unconventional method had infiltrated at least 4 P-38 squadrons stationed across England, a clear indication that the genie was out of the bottle. The pressing question now became whether official channels would acknowledge and integrate this innovation, subject it to rigorous study, or endeavor to suppress it as excessively dangerous. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The precise aerodynamic explanation for why disengaging a single engine mitigated the severe effects of compressibility remained elusive, even for the seasoned engineers at Lockheed's Burbank facility, who finally received detailed reports of the technique in December 1943. Their initial hypothesis posited that a reduction in overall engine power somehow decreased the aircraft's dive speed. However, this assumption was quickly invalidated, as pilots consistently reported maintaining or even increasing their dive velocity with one engine deactivated. The true answer resided in the intricate interplay between the propeller's rotational dynamics, the resulting disruption of airflow, and the P-38's distinctive twin-boom architecture with its wing-mounted engines. Under normal operating conditions, both propellers spun at exceedingly high RPM during a dive, even when throttle settings were reduced. Each propeller effectively functioned as a vast disk, violently churning through the air, generating a spiraling slipstream in its wake. These turbulent slipstreams flowed rearward along the aircraft's twin booms, directly impacting the airflow, reaching the horizontal stabilizer and elevator surfaces, which were strategically positioned between the tail booms. As the aircraft neared compressibility speeds, approximately Mach 0.68, localized shock waves began to materialize on the wing's upper surface and inboard sections. This phenomenon produced separated, highly turbulent air, which, in conjunction with the energetic propeller slipstreams, created an aerodynamic maelstrom at the aircraft's tail, utterly destroying the elevator's effectiveness as it sat within disturbed air currents, moving in multiple conflicting directions simultaneously. The act of deactivating one engine fundamentally altered this entire complex flow pattern, with one propeller either completely stopped or windmilling at a significantly reduced RPM. The resultant asymmetric slipstream effect paradoxically contributed to stabilizing the airflow reaching the critical tail surfaces. The operating engine's slipstream generated a rotating flow on one side of the aircraft, while the dormant engine's stationary or slowly spinning propeller created a comparatively clean and undisturbed airstream on the opposite side. This deliberate asymmetry effectively counteracted a portion of the turbulence generated by the shock waves forming on the wing. More significantly, it drastically reduced the overall volume of spiraling, high-energy air impinging upon the horizontal stabilizer at the very moment when that stabilizer required the cleanest possible airflow to maintain its crucial effectiveness. A secondary, yet equally important effect was observed by pilots, though they lacked the technical lexicon to articulate it precisely. The P-38's twin engines were positioned far outboard from the fuselage center line, housed within the booms roughly 8 feet apart. When both engines were generating thrust, even at reduced power settings during a dive, this thrust was symmetrically distributed. However, with one engine shut down, the remaining operational engine created an inherent yawing moment, a tendency for the aircraft to rotate around its vertical axis. To counteract this induced yaw, the pilot was compelled to apply corrective rudder pressure. This necessary rudder input, in turn, produced a slight side slip, meaning the aircraft's nose pointed marginally away from its actual direction of travel. This subtle side slip, perhaps only a modest 3 to 5 degrees, subtly altered the angle at which the air impacted the wing's leading edge. This minute alteration was sufficient to disrupt the formation of shock waves, just enough to postpone the onset of full compressibility lockup by approximately 0.05 Mach, which translated to a critical gain of roughly 30 megaramperes in controllable dive speed. The underlying mathematical complexities of this phenomenon were far from straightforward. Captain Harold Birkeland, an engineering officer assigned to the 55th Fighter Group and a pre-war alumnus of MIT's Aeronautical Engineering program, undertook the ambitious task of quantifying this effect. In a technical memorandum dated January 12, 1944, his calculations indicated that the single-engine dive configuration reduced the adverse pressure gradient on the horizontal stabilizer by approximately 18 to 22% at speeds ranging between Mach 0.65 and 0.70. This significant reduction proved sufficient to restore a partial degree of elevator authority at velocities where the aircraft would otherwise have been rendered completely uncontrollable. Lockheed's chief aerodynamicist, Clarence Kelly Johnson, a future visionary behind iconic aircraft like the U-2 spy plane and SR-71 Blackbird, reviewed both the combat reports and Birkeland's meticulous analysis in February 1944. Johnson was initially skeptical, finding the notion that deliberately inducing an asymmetric thrust condition could enhance high-speed handling counterintuitive. Nevertheless, when Lockheed's own test pilots replicated the technique in controlled dive tests conducted at Muroc Dry Lake in California. Their findings unequivocally confirmed what combat pilots had painstakingly discovered through perilous trial and error. The P-38 consistently remained controllable at indicated airspeeds, reaching up to 535 mph with one engine shut down, a marked improvement compared to the loss of control typically encountered around 505 MeP with both engines operating. The official endorsement and integration of the single-engine dive technique necessitated a painstaking navigation of military bureaucracy, an organizational structure that moved at a vastly different pace than the exigencies of combat. By January 1944, a critical mass of P-38 pilots was utilizing the method, making it impossible for 8th Air Force Headquarters to continue, ignoring its widespread adoption and proven efficacy. However, the transformation of individual pilot experimentation into standardized tactical doctrine demanded the establishment of formal training programs, the issuance of official technical orders, and the securing of formal approval from multiple echelons of command. Colonel Hub Zemka, the commanding officer of the 56th Fighter Group and one of the most revered tactical minds in the European theater, assumed a pivotal leadership role in formalizing the procedure after personally witnessing a compelling demonstration during a joint training exercise on January 18, 1944. Consequently, the inaugural structured training program for this groundbreaking technique commenced at Boxted Airfield in Essex, the home base of the 55th Fighter Group, on January 25, 1944. Pilots who had successfully employed the technique in the unforgiving environment of combat were subsequently designated as instructors for their less experienced comrades. The training progression was meticulously structured and inherently methodical, primarily due to the undeniable and significant risks involved. Pilots initially began by practicing the engine shutdown procedure in stable level flight at an altitude of 20,000 feet, allowing them to familiarize themselves with the aircraft's asymmetric handling characteristics, the specific rudder pressure required to counteract the yaw, and the precise sequence for restarting the engine. The Allison engines, in particular, could prove temperamental when attempting a restart at high altitudes, especially in the sub-zero temperatures commonly encountered over northern Europe. The established procedure mandated setting the mixture to auto-rich, priming the engine with 4 to 6 deliberate strokes, engaging the starter mechanism, and then smoothly advancing the throttle once ignition was successfully achieved. Under the immense stress of combat, with enemy German fighters in close proximity and precious altitude rapidly diminishing, every single one of these steps had to be executed with instinctive precision. Once pilots had demonstrated unequivocal proficiency with engine shutdowns and restarts in level flight, the training curriculum progressively advanced to shallow dives, initially no steeper than 20 degrees. Instructors consistently emphasized the critical importance of timing. Shutting down the engine prematurely would squander valuable altitude and dissipate the aircraft's energy advantage. Conversely, waiting until the onset of compressibility had already begun meant struggling with compromised controls while simultaneously attempting to manage the engine shutdown switches. The optimal moment, the sweet spot, was identified as occurring around 460 to 480 mph indicated airspeed, just before the initial buffeting began. Pilots were rigorously trained to recognize this crucial moment not merely by referencing the airspeed indicator, but by developing an intuitive feel for the aircraft, discerning the subtle yet distinct change in control pressure that signaled their approach to the very edge of the controllable envelope. The critical juncture of mastering high-speed dives prompted an unexpected and rather spirited discussion among the skilled aviators. A contingent of pilots staunchly advocated for deactivating the right engine, citing the practical advantage of maintaining their left hand firmly on the throttle quadrant, while their right hand deftly manipulated the control yoke. Conversely, another faction championed the shutdown of the left engine, contending that the resultant aerodynamic yaw proved more amenable to counteraction through judicious application of rudder input. Following a rigorous period of several weeks dedicated to the compilation and analysis of training data, a clear consensus gradually crystallized. The specific engine chosen for shutdown held no significant aerodynamic consequence. The benefit derived, irrespective of the engine selected, was empirically demonstrated to be nearly identical. What truly emerged as paramount was the unwavering commitment to consistency. Each pilot was strongly encouraged to designate one particular engine for this procedure, and invariably adhere to that choice, thereby ingraining the entire sequence into an instinctive, almost reflexive, muscle memory. By the advent of March 1944, the specialized training regimen had been systematically broadened to encompass every P-38 unit stationed across England, marking a significant operational shift. Technical Order Z0175F1, officially promulgated on the 8th of March 1944, formally sanctioned the single-engine dive technique. However, the directive was meticulously phrased, emphasizing its role as a flexible tactical alternative rather than an obligatory maneuver, allowing pilots discretion based on evolving combat situations. The order meticulously outlined specific altitude minimums for the crucial engine restart phase, no lower than 8,000 feet when operating over friendly territory, and a more conservative 10,000 feet when traversing enemy airspace. These stringent requirements were designed to furnish ample vertical space for addressing any unforeseen mechanical irregularities or for the necessary time to competently manage such contingencies. Furthermore, the order included explicit warnings regarding the inherent limitations of the technique. It was clarified that while the method effectively delayed and ameliorated the severe effects of compressibility, it did not entirely eradicate the phenomenon. Pilots still faced the very real risk of losing control should they aggressively exceed the critical threshold of 550 miles per hour. Despite the innovative technique, the aircraft itself remained an inherently unbalanced platform during the maneuver, still demanding sustained and precise rudder pressure from the pilot and exhibiting flight characteristics distinctly divergent from normal dual-engine operation. Recognizing these inherent traits, squadron operations officers ingeniously crafted sophisticated tactical formations specifically designed to accommodate and exploit the technique's potential. When initiating an aggressive bounce attack on German fighters from a superior altitude, the standard four-ship flight would strategically divide into two distinct pairs. The lead element, comprising two aircraft, would boldly commence the attack utilizing the single-engine dive, plunging earthward with enhanced control. Simultaneously, the second element would maintain both engines operational and position themselves at a higher altitude, ready to provide vital aerial cover for the lead element during their recovery phase and the critical moment of engine restart. This carefully coordinated approach not only safeguarded combat flexibility, but also optimized the aggressive potential inherent in the single-engine dive against enemy targets. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The seminal triumph, unequivocally linked to the single-engine dive technique, unfolded on March 15, 1944, amidst a critical bomber escort mission bound for Augsburg. Second Lieutenant Robert Anderson, a member of the 38th Fighter Squadron within the 55th Fighter Group, discerningly spotted a formation of 6 Bf-109Gs. These German fighters were positioned approximately 4,000 feet beneath his flight, which was cruising at a lofty 24,000 feet. The enemy aircraft were poised for a frontal assault against a vulnerable formation of B-17 flying fortresses. Anderson's flight of 4 P-38's possessed a distinct strategic supremacy, benefiting from both superior altitude and an advantageous sun position. Hitherto, such a scenario would have presented a textbook bounce opportunity that, regrettably, often culminated in profound frustration as the P-38's inevitably encountered the debilitating effects of compressibility during their dive attack. However, this particular engagement played out in a markedly different fashion. Anderson, with decisive intent, initiated his dive from 23,500 feet, rapidly accumulating impressive airspeed. Upon reaching an indicated airspeed of 480 mph, he meticulously deactivated his left engine, while his vigilant wingman maintained a higher perch to provide crucial aerial coverage. The Messerschmitts, perceiving the diving P-38's, executed their customary defensive split, with 3 aircraft veering left and 3 braking right, all entering moderate dives in an attempt to compel the American fighters into their familiar compressibility predicaments. Anderson, however, tenaciously pursued the rightmost element progressively, escalating his dive angle to an astonishing nearly 50 degrees. His airspeed continued its relentless ascent, surging past 500 mph, then further to 520 mph. Crucially, the aircraft controls remained unwavering and firm in his grip. The precursory shuddering and buffeting that typically heralded a control lockup never intensified beyond a mild manageable vibration. At an altitude of 18,000 feet, he had closed the distance to within 400 yards of the trailing Bf-109, still relentlessly closing the range and still maintaining complete command of his aircraft. The German pilot, very likely presuming the P-38 would either disengage or succumb to a loss of control at any moment, based on previous encounters with the type, persisted in his dive without initiating any aggressive, evasive maneuvers. Anderson, seizing the opportune moment, unleashed a volley of fire at a range of 300 yards. A sustained 3-second burst from all 4 50-caliber machine guns, and the formidable, single 20mm cannon. Scintillating tracers walked precisely across the Messerschmitt's left-wing root and fuselage. Immediately, pieces of the German fighter disintegrated and flew off. A thick plume of smoke erupted from the engine cowling, swiftly followed by vivid flames. The Bf-109 rolled inverted and plummeted into a flat spin. Anderson unequivocally confirmed that the enemy pilot had successfully bailed out at approximately 12,000 feet. With the threat neutralized, Anderson reinitiated his left engine at 14,000 feet without any discernible difficulty and seamlessly climbed back to rejoin his flight. The entire engagement, from the initial precipitous dive to the successful engine restart, transpired in a remarkable period of less than 90 seconds. News of Anderson's decisive victory reverberated throughout the P-38 community, within a mere matter of hours. This engagement provided irrefutable evidence that the innovative technique functioned not merely as a means of survival, but also as a potent instrument of lethality. Within the ensuing fortnight, 6 additional confirmed victories employing single-engine dives were meticulously recorded across 3 distinct squadrons. On March 22nd, Captain Harold Stump of the 20th Fighter Group masterfully utilized the technique to hunt down an FW-190 that had inflicted damage upon a B-24 bomber and was attempting to escape towards cloud cover. Stump, with calculated precision, deactivated his right engine at 25,000 feet and pursued the Focke-Wulf through 20,000 feet, then 15,000 feet. His P-38 remained unflinchingly stable throughout the high-speed descent, steadily closing the range. He opened fire at 10,000 feet from a distance of 250 yards. The FW-190 was annihilated in a spectacular explosion, most likely resulting from direct hits to its fuel tank situated behind the cockpit. The profound psychological metamorphosis experienced by P-38 pilots proved to be equally consequential as the tangible, tactical results. For many months prior, they had been operating an aircraft whose inherent characteristics seemingly punished aggressive maneuvers, frequently leading to dangerous and uncontrollable dives. Now, however, they possessed a transformative tool that fundamentally reinvigorated their capacity to press home attacks without the debilitating apprehension of uncontrollable descents that had previously haunted them. A palpable surge of confidence returned to the ranks. Pilots who had previously exhibited hesitancy about diving on German fighters once again became assertively aggressive. The fundamental airframe of the aircraft itself had not undergone any alteration, but the pilot's ability to unleash its full potential and exploit its capabilities had expanded dramatically. The Germans, for their part, perceived a discernible alteration in the American tactics, though the precise nature of this change initially remained enigmatic. Luftwaffe combat reports originating from April 1944 began chronicling observations that American twin-engine fighters were now persisting in pursuit of German aircraft through dive maneuvers, where, in previous encounters, they would have invariably broken off due to compressibility issues. An intercepted German pilot from Jagdgeschwader 2, shot down on April 8, 1944, divulged during his interrogation that his unit had received explicit warnings indicating that the Lightning pilots had assimilated new tactics and were no longer reliably vulnerable in high-speed diving engagements. The specific operational details of these novel tactics, however, continued to elude German intelligence for several more months, yet the tactical advantage it had provided was unmistakably eroding. German intelligence officers first commenced to unravel the intricacies of the single-engine dive technique in late April 1944, a breakthrough facilitated by the meticulous analysis of gun camera footage recovered from an FW-190 that had remarkably survived an engagement with P-38's over France. The critical footage depicted a Lightning in relentless pursuit during a steep dive, and a meticulous frame-by-frame scrutiny revealed a peculiar anomaly. One of its propellers was not rotating normally. It appeared to be either windmilling sluggishly or entirely stationary. Initial analysis erroneously attributed this observation to battle damage or a mechanical failure. However, when compelling recurrence of similar footage appeared from 3 separate engagements over a concentrated 2-week period, Luftwaffe technical intelligence prudently intensified their inquiry, recognizing a pattern rather than isolated incidents. The unequivocal corroboration regarding the technique arrived from a most unexpected source, a fortuitous twist of fate in the ongoing intelligence struggle. On May 6, 1944, a P-38J belonging to the 479th Fighter Group sustained a devastating engine malfunction during a combat engagement over Belgium. The pilot, First Lieutenant Thomas Watkins, valiantly attempted to return to England on his remaining operational engine, but was ultimately compelled to abandon his aircraft over German-held territory near Liège. He was swiftly apprehended by enemy forces within a mere matter of hours following his descent. During the subsequent questioning at Ober-Ursel West, the Luftwaffe's principal interrogation facility for captured Allied airmen, Watkins initially staunchly adhered to the standard prisoner of war protocol, refusing to discuss any tactical or technical matters beyond his name, rank, and serial number. However, the astute interrogators noticed a peculiar artifact among his personal effects: a small notebook containing handwritten procedures for various emergency situations, conspicuously including a section prominently titled High-Speed Dive, Single Engine Technique. The German interrogators, highly experienced in artfully eliciting information through seemingly casual and innocuous conversation, gradually coaxed crucial details from Watkins over a period of several days. He eventually described the core aspects of the technique, although he maintained that he had only employed it once and professed not to fully comprehend the underlying aerodynamic principles that made it effective. Nevertheless, that partial, albeit incomplete information proved to be sufficient for their purposes. By mid-May 1944, the Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, the German High Command of the Air Force, promulgated a comprehensive tactical bulletin to all fighter units, issuing a stern warning that American P-38 pilots were now deliberately disengaging one engine during dive attacks to maintain superior control at high velocities. The bulletin prescribed a series of countermeasures for German pilots. It recommended executing more aggressive initial brakes when bounced by Lightnings descending from altitude, employing steeper dive angles to force the Americans deeper into their dives before they could effectively employ the technique, and initiating immediate hard-turning maneuvers once the P-38 closed to firing range. This last recommendation capitalized on the known vulnerability of the single-engine configuration, which inherently reduced the Lightning's ability to sustain high G turns. Jagdgeschwader 26, a unit notable for their earlier proficiency in exploiting the P-38's compressibility problems, swiftly recalibrated their tactics within a matter of weeks. Major Joseph Pips Priller, the distinguished commander of the unit and a seasoned veteran boasting over 100 aerial victories, promulgated new engagement guidelines on May 28, 1944. When confronted by P-38's holding an altitude advantage, his pilots were mandated to execute immediate split-S maneuvers followed by low-altitude, high-speed runs, a strategy divergent from the moderate diving spirals they had previously employed. The underpinning strategic calculus was sound. Force the Lightning pilot to commit to a vertical dive early, thereby expediting the consumption of his altitude and curtailing the duration he could spend in controlled pursuit, before being compelled to break off, to restart his engine and regain precious altitude. The P-38 Lightning, once its engine was successfully restarted, could effectively recover and regain its desired altitude. Nevertheless, the sophisticated tactical adjustments implemented by German fighter pilots demonstrated a variable degree of success. These countermeasures certainly curtailed the P-38's inherent aerial advantages, yet they conspicuously failed to entirely negate them. A significant aerial engagement unfolded over the skies of Normandy on June 12, 1944, merely 6 days following the momentous D-Day landings. This extensive skirmish saw the participation of elements from 3 distinct P-38 groups clashing with numerous German fighter units. American aircrews subsequently asserted a total of 14 confirmed aerial victories, incurring the loss of 3 P-38 aircraft in the process. German operational records, however, corroborate the destruction of 11 of their fighters during that specific confrontation. A portion of these American triumphs were indeed achieved through the audacious single-engine dive technique employed by the Lightnings, yet it was also observed that several German pilots skillfully eluded Lightning assaults by executing their newly developed aggressive hard brake maneuvers. This particular engagement vividly underscored that while the innovative single-engine technique had undeniably altered the tactical equation, it had not, by any means, rendered the formidable German fighters utterly defenseless. The most profound immediate impact of this ingenious technique was undeniably psychological. For the first time since their deployment to the European theater, P-38 pilots experienced a newfound confidence, sensing that they could now confront German adversaries on roughly equitable terms within the perilous diving vertical dogfight. The immense psychological burden associated with operating an aircraft known to possess a critical, potentially fatal flaw in high-speed dives had finally begun to dissipate. Concurrently, German pilots found themselves stripped of one of their most reliable and long-standing tactical advantages. The Luftwaffe, by mid-1944, was grappling with a multitude of escalating and interconnected challenges, severe fuel shortages crippling their operations, an unsustainable rate of pilot attrition eroding their experienced ranks, the systematic loss of air superiority across crucial fronts, and now the alarming erosion of specific, well-practiced tactical techniques they had previously depended upon when engaging particular types of Allied aircraft. The groundbreaking single-engine dive technique continued to be employed throughout the remainder of the European War, persisting until its conclusion in May 1945. However, its operational frequency progressively diminished as the P-38's strategic role underwent a significant transformation, and as more advanced aircraft types were introduced into service. The formidable P-51 Mustang, for instance, which commenced its large-scale deployment early in 1944, did not suffer from the same severe compressibility issues that plagued the Lightning. Consequently, the Mustang gradually assumed and ultimately replaced the P-38 in many critical escort fighter capacities. By late 1944, the majority of P-38 units stationed in Europe had transitioned away from their primary fighter duties, being repurposed for demanding ground attack missions. In these new roles, which largely involved low-altitude strafing and bombing runs against enemy ground targets, the highly specialized high-altitude single-engine dive maneuver found itself largely irrelevant and therefore of very limited practical application. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Nonetheless, the enduring legacy of this unorthodox and ingenious solution stretched far beyond the immediate tactical quandary it had so effectively resolved. Post-war investigations saw engineers from Lockheed the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, which later evolved into NASA, and various other prominent aircraft manufacturers undertake exhaustive studies of the P-38's notorious compressibility issue and the single-engine workaround that had emerged from combat experience. This aerodynamic phenomenon laid bare critical lacunae in the prevailing understanding of transonic aerodynamics. That poorly comprehended and treacherous regime, situated between subsonic and supersonic flight speeds, where nascent shock waves first begin their formation. Earlier wind tunnel testing conducted in 1943 and early 1944 had regrettably failed to accurately predict the severity of the P-38's high-speed problems, primarily because the wind tunnels available at the time lacked the capability to precisely simulate the complex conditions of transonic flight. In essence, the P-38 aircraft had inadvertently transformed into a full-scale flying test platform for aerodynamic phenomena that existing laboratory equipment of the era was simply incapable of reproducing or analyzing. Kelly Johnson's meticulous post-war assessment, thoroughly documented in a comprehensive technical paper he published in 1947, unequivocally acknowledged that the P-38's distinctive tail configuration was fundamentally flawed for sustained high-speed flight. The decision to mount the horizontal stabilizer directly within the turbulent, disturbed airflow behind the main wing and precisely between the twin booms created an aerodynamically impossible situation once disruptive shock waves began to form at high speeds. Subsequent twin-boom aircraft designs, exemplified by later variants of the Northrop P-61 Black Widow, and numerous post-war aircraft, meticulously integrated the hard-won lessons gleaned from the P-38's struggles. Consequently, tail configurations, wherein the horizontal stabilizer was positioned atop a vertical fin, well above the turbulent wake of the wing, became the established standard for aircraft specifically designed and expected to operate reliably at high subsonic velocities. Furthermore, the experience with the single-engine technique profoundly influenced prevailing notions regarding asymmetric thrust management. Prior to the P-38's operational experiences, asymmetric thrust was almost universally regarded as an emergency condition, something to be either swiftly corrected or meticulously avoided at all costs. The groundbreaking discovery that a deliberate, controlled application of asymmetry could actually confer significant aerodynamic benefits under very specific flight conditions opened entirely new avenues of research and investigation into aircraft control. While post-war experimental aircraft occasionally incorporated differential thrust as an innovative control mechanism, the concept never quite achieved mainstream adoption in conventional fighter design. The true, more subtle lesson extracted from this experience was that unconventional and sometimes counterintuitive solutions to complex aerodynamic challenges could in fact be unearthed through rigorous operational experimentation on the front lines, rather than solely through exhaustive theoretical engineering analysis in the laboratory. Perhaps the most enduring and profound legacy of this entire episode was not technical in nature, but rather deeply cultural. The single-engine dive technique powerfully demonstrated that combat pilots operating under the immense duress of life-or-death situations possessed the unique capacity to discover practical solutions that had eluded even the most brilliant engineers and designers. This remarkable validation underscored the critical importance of establishing rapid and responsive feedback loops between operational flying units and the aircraft development teams, a concept that subsequently became a foundational principle for post-war military aviation development. The era when aircraft designers simply delivered a finished product and fully expected pilots to passively adapt to its characteristics was definitively drawing to a close. The P-38 experience served as irrefutable proof that the most effective and robust aircraft systems emerged from a genuine, iterative collaboration between those who meticulously designed the aircraft and those who bravely flew them in the crucible of combat. For the intrepid pilots who navigated the P-38s across the skies of Europe during 1943 and 1944, the technique held a significance that was far more personal and deeply resonant. It stood as tangible proof of their innate ability to adapt, to improvise under extreme pressure, and ultimately to overcome inherent limitations in their equipment through sheer skill, ingenuity, and unwavering determination. While the P-38 never quite achieved the status of the dominant fighter in the European theater that pre-war expectations had so optimistically predicted, it nonetheless served effectively and honorably once its dedicated crews mastered the art of operating within and ingeniously working around its known limitations. Hundreds of pilots skillfully guided their Lightnings safely back to base, employing a technique that was conspicuously absent from any official technical manual, a maneuver discovered not within the sterile confines of an engineering laboratory, but born from the desperate, high-stakes improvisation of combat at a dizzying 22,000 feet. This represents precisely the kind of invaluable innovation that frequently remains unrecorded in official historical accounts, but profoundly alters the outcome of critical air battles, and, most importantly, saves countless lives. One expertly shut down engine and one precisely controlled dive at a time.